Blood dripped from Jason Walker's knuckles as he stared at the unconscious flight attendant. The other passengers froze in shock. Nobody knew the black man in seat 3A owned Skyline Airways, the very airline that had just humiliated him in front of everyone. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you've ever witnessed discrimination while traveling, this story will resonate with you. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear more true stories of justice served. Now, let's rewind to see how a simple flight turned into a corporate earthquake that changed an entire industry. Jason Walker adjusted his worn navy hoodie as he settled into seat 3A. At 45, the self-made billionaire CEO of Walker Industries had learned that comfort trumped appearance during long flights. His usual tailored Armani suits remained packed in his luggage. Today, he wasn't flying as Jason Walker, the man whose face graced the cover of Forbes last month. Today, he was just another passenger. 3 weeks earlier, Walker Industries had quietly acquired Skyline Airways in a deal known only to both companies' boards. The transaction hadn't yet been announced to the public or even to Skyline employees. Jason had insisted on this secrecy for one specific reason: he wanted to experience the airline as a regular customer before making any changes. "Sir, can I see your boarding pass again?" A flight attendant with a plastic smile hovered over him, her eyes narrowing slightly. Jason smiled politely and handed over his ticket. "Is there a problem?" "Just routine checks," she replied curtly before moving on to the next passenger, a white man in a rumpled t-shirt whom she greeted warmly without asking for verification. Jason noticed but wasn't surprised. This was exactly why he was here. Growing up in South Chicago's roughest neighborhood, Jason had learned early that the world viewed him differently. His single mother, Darlene, had worked 3 jobs to put food on the table while instilling in him the belief that education was his ticket out. Jason had earned a full scholarship to Northwestern, graduated summa cum laude, and built Walker Technologies from his garage into a global tech empire. But success hadn't shielded him from discrimination. If anything, it had exposed him to new varieties of it. The subtle kind that came with confused looks when he walked into board meetings. The persistent questioning of his credentials that his white counterparts never faced. The security guards who followed him through high-end stores even when he was buying out their inventory. His philosophy had always been simple: treat everyone with dignity regardless of appearance. It was this principle that had attracted the best talent to his company and created its legendary inclusive culture. Today's journey had a clear purpose. Skyline Airways had a reputation problem. Complaints about discriminatory treatment had been increasing over the past 2 years. The previous management had dismissed these as isolated incidents or customer exaggerations. Jason knew better. Before committing billions to the acquisition, he'd made solving this cultural problem a personal mission. What better way to assess the situation than to experience it himself? Flight attendant Stephanie Miller moved efficiently through the cabin, her platinum blonde hair pulled into a tight bun. With 15 years at Skyline and multiple commendations for outstanding service, she was considered exemplary by management. Her personnel file, which Jason had reviewed, contained glowing evaluations but also 3 customer complaints about differential treatment that had been dismissed without investigation. In the cockpit, Captain Thomas Reynolds reviewed the flight plan. At 58, the former military pilot had been with Skyline for 20 years. Known for running a tight ship, his bold school approach had earned him respect among certain colleagues and unease among others. His personnel file showed perfect technical performance but noted his resistance to the company's newer diversity initiatives, which he had called political correctness gone mad, in a staff meeting. As the final passengers boarded Flight 372 from Chicago to San Francisco, Jason opened his laptop. He had 6 hours to catch up on work before landing. Little did he know that this flight would transform his business strategy and shake an entire industry to its core. The Boeing 787 reached cruising altitude, and the seatbelt sign dinged off. Jason stretched his legs and continued reviewing quarterly reports on his laptop. First class was half full, 12 passengers spread across 16 spacious seats. He'd chosen a window seat, preferring to observe rather than engage. From his peripheral vision, Jason noticed the subtle differences in how Stephanie interacted with passengers. For white passengers, there were warm smiles, casual conversations about destinations, and solicitous offers of extra pillows. For the only other person of color in first class, an elderly Asian woman, communication was minimal, efficient but cold. Beverage service? Stephanie stopped at his row, her question clipped. Coffee, black, please, Jason replied. She returned moments later, placing his drink down without meeting his eyes, sloshing a few drops onto the tray table. No napkin was offered, unlike for the passenger across the aisle who received his drink with a napkin, stirrer, and small biscuit. Jason dabbed at the spill with his sleeve and continued working. This wasn't his first experience with subtle discrimination, and he made mental notes without showing reaction. An hour into the flight, Stephanie began preparing the first-class meal service. The aroma of warm bread and seared beef filled the cabin. She distributed linen napkins and silverware to each passenger, carefully setting up their tray tables. When she reached Jason, she passed his row entirely. Jason waited patiently, thinking perhaps she had forgotten. After serving everyone else, Stephanie began collecting drink glasses. Jason raised his hand slightly. "Excuse me, I believe you missed me for the meal service," he said politely. Stephanie paused, her smile tightening. "The premium meal service is only for first-class passengers, sir." A beat of silence fell over the nearby rows. The Asian woman 2 rows ahead turned slightly, her expression a mixture of sympathy and recognition. "I am in first class," Jason responded calmly, pointing to his seat number. 3A. Stephanie's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "May I see your boarding pass again?" Jason retrieved it from his hoodie pocket and handed it to her. This was the 3rd time his credentials had been checked since boarding. She examined it with exaggerated care. "There seems to be some confusion. Perhaps you were upgraded last minute? The system sometimes fails to update the meal count." "I purchased this ticket 3 weeks ago," Jason clarified, keeping his voice even. "First class, direct from Chicago to San Francisco." Stephanie handed back his boarding pass with a pinched expression. "You might be more comfortable in our economy section, where the service is less formal. I can arrange for a seat change if you'd prefer." The implication hung in the air like a noxious gas. Several nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably. A white woman across the aisle, later identified as Diane Foster, looked up from her book, frowning. "I'm perfectly comfortable right here in the seat I paid for," Jason replied, his tone still measured despite the growing knot in his stomach. "I'd like the same meal service provided to the other first-class passengers, please." Stephanie's smile never reached her eyes. "Of course, sir. I'll see what's left." She returned several minutes later with a tray that looked noticeably different from those served to other passengers. The steak was smaller, overcooked, and placed haphazardly on the plate. The side vegetables appeared to be from the economy meal option. As she set it down, her elbow accidentally knocked against Jason's open laptop, sending a splash of red wine across the keyboard. The screen flickered and went black. "Oh my! How clumsy of me," Stephanie exclaimed with theatrical concern. "Let me get you some napkins." Jason stared at his now ruined $5,000 laptop containing the only copy of the speech he was scheduled to deliver tomorrow. Years of practicing calm in the face of provocation kept his expression neutral. "That was no accident," came a clear voice from across the aisle. Diane Foster had set down her book and was staring directly at Stephanie. "I've been watching how you've treated this gentleman since takeoff, and it's absolutely shameful." Stephanie's face flushed. "Ma'am, I assure you this was just an unfortunate accident. We take customer service very seriously at Skyline Airways. So seriously that you've checked his boarding pass 3 times, skipped him during meal service, suggested he move to economy, and now destroyed his property. Diane countered, her voice carrying to the surrounding rows. I'm an attorney specializing in discrimination cases, and I'm sitting here witnessing textbook discriminatory behavior. Other passengers were now openly watching the confrontation. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Stephanie's hand moved to the service phone. I'll need to inform the captain about this disruption. Minutes later, Captain Thomas Reynolds emerged from the cockpit, his captain's hat tucked under his arm. His craggy face surveyed the scene with clear annoyance. What seems to be the problem here? He asked, directing the question to Stephanie rather than Jason. This, gentlemen, is causing a disturbance and making accusations against our staff, Stephanie explained, emphasizing the word gentleman with barely disguised sarcasm. Jason remained seated, hands folded calmly in his lap despite the wine still dripping from his ruined laptop. Captain, I was denied the same meal service as other first-class passengers, and when I politely requested equal treatment, your flight attendant deliberately spilled wine on my computer. Captain Reynolds assessed Jason with a dismissive glance, taking in the hoodie, jeans, and worn sneakers. Sir, our first-class passengers expect a certain environment. If you're uncomfortable with our service protocols, we can certainly find you accommodation in another section of the aircraft. Are you suggesting I don't belong in first class? Jason asked directly. The captain's expression hardened. I'm suggesting that Skyline Airways has standards, and our flight attendants are trained to maintain those standards. Standards that apparently include treating passengers differently based on their appearance. Diane interjected, holding up her phone. I've been recording this interaction, by the way. For documentation purposes. Captain Reynolds turned to her with a tight smile. Recording is against company policy during flights, ma'am. I'll have to ask you to delete that footage. I'm well aware of FAA regulations, Captain, Diane replied smoothly. There's no federal prohibition against recording interactions with flight staff as long as it doesn't interfere with their duties. As for company policy, it's superseded by federal anti-discrimination laws. The standoff continued for several uncomfortable minutes. Other passengers watched with a mixture of embarrassment and fascination. Perhaps we should continue this discussion after landing, Captain Reynolds finally suggested, his voice stiff with barely controlled anger. In the meantime, sir, I must ask you to refrain from disrupting the cabin further. I've been nothing but polite despite being discriminated against, Jason responded. The only disruption was caused by your staff. One more complaint from you, and I'll be forced to contact security to meet us at the gate, the captain warned before turning to head back to the cockpit. As he walked away, Jason noticed several passengers averted their eyes, unwilling to get involved. The all-too-familiar weight of isolation settled on his shoulders, the same feeling he'd experienced countless times when facing discrimination while others looked away. Diane, however, moved to the empty seat beside him. Don't worry, she whispered. They picked the wrong person to mess with today. She had no idea just how right she was. As Captain Reynolds disappeared back into the cockpit, Jason Walker pulled out his phone. Despite the aircraft's cruising status with allowed phone usage, Stephanie immediately approached. Sir, I need to remind you that cell phone calls are not permitted during flight, she said sharply. Jason looked up with a calm that came from years of handling hostile board meetings. I'm aware of FAA regulations. I'm using airplane mode to access my calendar. This was technically true, though his next action would push the boundaries of in-flight communication policies. As soon as Stephanie moved away, Jason activated the plane's paid Wi-Fi service and opened his encrypted messaging app. To Terrell Washington, his executive assistant of 8 years and most trusted confidant, he typed, Code Amber at Skyline. Full documentation protocol. Meet me at SFO Gate B23 with Angela Daniels, legal team, and PR, bring company credentials. No press yet. Terrell would understand. They had established response protocols for various situations years ago. Code Amber meant discrimination witnessed firsthand, requiring immediate executive response. As Jason put away his phone, memories flooded back, painful chapters from a life defined by fighting to be treated equally despite extraordinary success. At 17, he'd been a math prodigy with perfect SAT scores, yet a guidance counselor suggested community college because it might be a better cultural fit. At 26, with 2 patents already generating millions, a bank officer had denied him a modest small business loan until a white colleague vouched for him. At 34, with a net worth exceeding $100 million, he'd been handcuffed in the driveway of his Malibu home because a neighbor reported a suspicious man entering the property. Each incident had strengthened his resolve. Each had fueled his determination to create change. He'd promised himself that once he had real power, he would use it to ensure others wouldn't face the same barriers. Last week's acquisition board meeting replayed in his mind. The Skyline Airways chairman had dismissively mentioned some culture problems, but assured Jason they were nothing systematic. The HR reports Jason had privately obtained told a different story: 26 discrimination complaints in 18 months, all conveniently classified as resolved with no disciplinary action. His original plan had been a gradual culture transformation, new training programs, revised service protocols, careful replacement of problematic leaders. That plan had just been scrapped. Sometimes shock therapy was the only effective treatment. "Are you okay?" Diane asked softly from the seat beside him. That was absolutely appalling behavior from both of them. Jason smiled slightly. "I've had worse. Much worse." "That doesn't make it acceptable," she replied. "I'm Diane Foster, by the way. Civil rights attorney with Hammond and Associates." "Jason Walker," he replied, offering his hand without elaboration. "I record incidents like these for a reason," she continued, keeping her voice low. "I've handled dozens of discrimination cases against airlines. The pattern is always the same: they deny everything unless there's irrefutable evidence. And you provide that evidence." "When I can. Most victims of discrimination don't have the resources to fight back against corporate giants. My firm takes these cases pro bono." Jason studied her with new interest. "You do this regularly? Fly first class looking for discrimination cases?" Diane laughed softly. "No, I fly first class because I work 80-hour weeks and value comfort. But I don't shut my eyes when injustice happens 3 feet away from me." For the first time since the incident began, Jason felt a glimmer of optimism. Here was someone who didn't just acknowledge discrimination but actively fought against it. Perhaps she could be an ally in what was coming. "I might need your recording," he said carefully. "And possibly your professional insights on some related matters." Diane raised an eyebrow. "Are you planning to file a complaint?" "I'd be happy to refer you to colleagues who specialize in airline discrimination." "Something like that," Jason replied. "Let's talk more after landing." The remaining 3 hours of the flight passed in tense silence. Stephanie avoided their section entirely, delegating service to a younger flight attendant who appeared visibly uncomfortable with the situation. Captain Reynolds made 2 unnecessary announcements about following crew instructions for a safe and pleasant journey, each time emphasizing the word instructions with pointed authority. Jason used the time to plan. By the time the plane began its descent into San Francisco, he had mapped out the next 24 hours in detail. People who mistook his calm demeanor for passivity didn't understand that beneath the surface, his mind constantly calculated, evaluated, and strategized. As the wheels touched down at SFO, Jason made his final decision. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about the humiliation he'd personally experienced. It was about using a pivotal moment to force change in an industry that had normalized discrimination for too long. The captain's voice came over the intercom: "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to San Francisco. Local time is 2:15 p.m. with clear skies and 68 degrees. Please remain seated until we reach the gate and the seatbelt sign is turned off." Jason buckled down for what would come next. The real journey was just beginning. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds speaking. We've arrived at Gate B23. On behalf of Skyline Airways, I'd like to thank you for flying with us today. Crew, prepare doors for arrival. The seatbelt signs dinged off, and passengers began the familiar routine of gathering belongings and queuing in the aisles. Jason remained seated, exchanging contact information with Diane Foster while other travelers disembarked. "Flight crew, please remain on board for a brief moment," came an unfamiliar voice over the intercom, not the captain's or Stephanie's. Through the windows, Jason could see a small group of people in business attire waiting at the jet bridge entrance. He recognized Terrell's tall figure immediately. His executive assistant had executed the plan perfectly. As the last passenger exited, Stephanie approached Jason with forced politeness. "Sir, we've arrived in San Francisco. You're free to deplane now." "Actually," Jason replied calmly, "I think we all need to stay for a moment." Captain Reynolds emerged from the cockpit, irritation evident on his face. "Sir, whatever complaint you wish to file can be handled at the customer service desk. We have another flight to prepare for." The jet bridge door reopened, and 5 people entered the aircraft. Terrell Washington led the group, his 6'4" frame commanding attention in an impeccably tailored suit. Behind him came Angela Daniels, Walker Industries' formidable head of human resources, 2 members of the legal team, and the chief communications officer. "What's the meaning of this?" Captain Reynolds demanded. "This area is restricted to authorized personnel only." Terrell stepped forward, handing the captain a document. "Authorization from Skyline Airways corporate headquarters for an immediate operational review." Stephanie moved closer, confusion replacing her earlier confidence. "I don't understand. Who are you people?" Jason finally stood, accepting the company ID badge and leather portfolio Terrell handed him. With deliberate movements, he removed his hoodie, revealing a simple black t-shirt underneath. "My name is Jason Walker. As of 3 weeks ago, I am the majority owner and chief executive officer of Skyline Airways." The color drained from Stephanie's face. Captain Reynolds stared at the ID badge, then at Jason, his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror. That's not possible," he stammered. "We would have been informed of an ownership change. The public announcement was scheduled for next week," Jason explained, his voice steady. "I wanted to experience our service as an ordinary passenger first. That experience has been educational." The shock in the cabin was palpable. 2 other flight attendants who had been preparing to leave froze in the galley. Diane Foster watched with undisguised satisfaction from her seat. Angela Daniels stepped forward, her expression stern beneath her precisely cut afro. "Mr. Walker, shall I proceed with the protocol?" "Please do," Jason nodded. Angela addressed the stunned crew. "I'm Angela Daniels, head of human resources for Walker Industries and acting HR director for Skyline Airways during the transition. Due to serious allegations of discriminatory behavior, this entire flight crew is being placed on immediate administrative suspension pending a full investigation." "This is outrageous." Captain Reynolds sputtered. "You can't suspend an entire crew based on one disgruntled passenger's claims." "Actually," Diane interjected, holding up her phone, "the claims are thoroughly documented." She handed her phone to Angela, who connected it to the aircraft's entertainment system. Within moments, the video began playing on every screen in the cabin, crystal clear footage of the entire incident, from the meal denial to the wine spill to the captain's threatening response. "Would you like to see it again? Perhaps in slow motion?" Jason asked quietly. Stephanie's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Walker, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. I had no idea who you were." "That's precisely the problem," Jason replied. "You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with basic human dignity. Have you ever witnessed discrimination like this while traveling? Type 1 in the comments if you think Jason was right to suspend the entire crew, or 2 if you think it was too harsh. Hit that like button if you believe more companies should take discrimination this seriously. Now, let's see what happens when a CEO decides to take a stand against racism in his own company. Will the crew face consequences, or will they find a way to justify their actions? By nightfall, #Skyline discrimination was trending nationwide. Despite the Walker Industries communications team's efforts to handle the situation discreetly, 3 passenger videos had already surfaced online. The most damning, a 2-minute clip showing Captain Reynolds suggesting Jason might be more comfortable in another section, had been viewed 4 million times in just 6 hours. Jason sat in a conference room at Skyline San Francisco headquarters, watching news coverage on a wall-mounted screen. CNN's Chiron read, "Black billionaire goes undercover, exposes airline discrimination." Stock is down 12% in after-hours trading, Terrell reported, sliding a tablet across the table. The board is requesting an emergency meeting tomorrow morning. Schedule it for 9, Jason replied, eyes still on the screen where a panel of commentators debated whether his actions were justified or excessive. Angela Daniels entered with a stack of personnel files. "I've pulled everything on the Flight 372 crew. It's worse than we thought." She laid out the documents methodically. Stephanie Miller has 7 complaints of discriminatory behavior in her file, not the 3 we initially found. 4 were buried in a separate system. "And Reynolds?" Jason asked. 19 years with the company, consistently rated excellent on technical skills, but... She pushed forward a folder thick with incident reports. "There's a pattern of complaints from both passengers and crew members of color. All classified as resolved through counseling with no disciplinary action." Jason wasn't surprised. The airline industry's history with discrimination was long and well documented. What troubled him more was the systematic cover-up, the carefully constructed processes designed to acknowledge complaints while ensuring nothing actually changed. His phone buzzed with a text from Diane Foster, turning down interview requests as promised. "Call me when you're ready to discuss next steps." They had exchanged numbers at the gate, and Jason had asked her to decline media comments until they could coordinate strategy. Her expertise in discrimination cases would be invaluable in the coming days. "Sir," Terrell interrupted his thoughts, "you should see this." He turned the tablet to show a local news live stream. Stephanie Miller stood outside SFO, tears streaming down her face as cameras flashed. "It was a simple misunderstanding," she sobbed. "I've dedicated 15 years to Skyline. I would never discriminate against anyone. Mr. Walker was dressed very casually, and I simply didn't recognize him as a first-class passenger." The reporter thrust a microphone closer, "But videos show you served other casually dressed passengers without question. Why was Mr. Walker treated differently?" Stephanie's expression hardened slightly. "I can't comment on specifics during an ongoing investigation, but Skyline has strict service protocols for passenger verification." Jason shook his head. The verification excuse was textbook, he'd heard it countless times in various forms. The implication was always the same: black people required extra scrutiny because they didn't naturally belong in certain spaces. "She's already retained counsel," Angela noted. "Gerald Tucker, he specializes in wrongful termination cases." A notification appeared on Jason's phone, a private message from an unfamiliar number: "You've made a powerful enemy today. Not everyone will stand by while you destroy good people's careers for publicity. Watch your back." Jason showed the message to Terrell, who immediately began tracing the source. This wasn't the first threat Jason had received for taking a stand against discrimination, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. At 11 that evening, the conference room door opened to admit William Chen, Skyline's outgoing CEO who had agreed to stay on during the transition. His face was ashen. "Jason, we need to talk about damage control. The board is split on how to handle this. Some members think we should settle with the crew quickly and issue a generic statement about improving training." Jason's expression remained impassive. "That won't be happening. These are complicated situations," Chen insisted. "Reynolds has been with us for nearly 20 years. He has friends in the industry, connections with the pilots' union. Stephanie has family medical issues, her mother's cancer treatment is covered by our health plan. I'm not unsympathetic to their personal circumstances, Jason replied, but this isn't about individuals. It's about a corporate culture that enables and covers up discrimination. That stops now. Chen sighed. The press is calling it an overreaction. Billionaire fires entire crew over meal service doesn't exactly generate public sympathy. Then we change the narrative, Jason said firmly. Tomorrow, we release every discrimination complaint filed against Skyline in the past 5 years, along with how each was handled. Complete transparency. Chen blanched. That's hundreds of complaints. The legal exposure would be enormous. Not as enormous as the exposure we face if we continue sweeping this under the rug, Jason countered. I didn't buy this airline to maintain the status quo. As if on cue, Terrell's phone chimed. Sir, Captain Reynolds just gave an interview to Fox News. It's not good. They turned to the screen where Reynolds, still in his uniform, spoke with righteous indignation. What happened today is nothing short of corporate terrorism. A wealthy individual with an agenda deliberately provoked a situation, recorded it out of context, and is using it to dismantle safety protocols that protect all passengers. The interviewer nodded sympathetically. So you're saying these protocols would apply to any passenger, regardless of race? Absolutely, Reynolds insisted. In today's security environment, we have to be vigilant. If someone doesn't match the typical profile of the cabin they're seated in, additional verification is standard procedure. Jason turned off the sound, having heard enough. He just admitted their policy is to profile passengers based on appearance. Get that clip to legal immediately. The night stretched on as they mapped strategy. At 2 a.m, Angela placed a thick binder on the table, her preliminary findings after hours of system access and interviews with headquarters staff. It's systematic, she announced grimly. There's an unofficial but widely understood practice of flagging upgrade verification for passengers who seem out of place in premium cabins. The language is carefully coded, but in practice, it almost exclusively targets people of color and those perceived as Middle Eastern. Jason thought back to his childhood, sitting at his mother's kitchen table as she explained why the world would treat him differently. You'll have to be twice as good to get half as far, she told him. But never let them make you believe you don't belong. Decades later, with billions in the bank and his name on skyscrapers, he was still being told he didn't belong. By dawn, Jason had made his decision. This wouldn't be handled with the usual corporate playbook of vague statements and token policy changes. The revelation of systematic discrimination demanded systematic change, starting with those who had enforced and enabled the broken culture. As the sun rose over San Francisco Bay, he prepared to face the board, the press, and the public backlash that would inevitably follow. Some would call him vindictive, others opportunistic. Few would understand that this had never been about one meal on one flight. It was about every person who had ever been made to feel they didn't belong in a space they had every right to occupy. 3 days after the incident, Jason Walker stood before a wall of screens in Skyline's data center, watching as Angela Daniels directed a team of forensic IT specialists through the company's labyrinthine information systems. Show me the hidden flags again, she instructed a technician who was mapping passenger data flows. The specialist highlighted a field labeled SVIP, Special Verification of Identity Protocol. This tag was applied to approximately 8% of first and business class passengers over the past year, he explained. Once flagged, these passengers received what the system called enhanced credential verification during their journey. And the demographic breakdown of flagged passengers? Jason asked, already knowing the answer. The technician pulled up a pie chart. The visual told the damning story. 76% of flagged passengers were identifiably non-white based on name, origin, or passport data. They built discrimination right into the algorithm, Angela said, shaking her head in disgust. And they covered it with plausible deniability by calling it security protocol. Jason had seen similar systems before, seemingly neutral processes that somehow always produced biased outcomes. The tech industry had been grappling with algorithmic discrimination for years. He'd naively thought the travel sector might be different. His phone buzzed with a message from Diane Foster, former Skyline flight attendant, wants to talk. Says she was fired after reporting discrimination. Can meet today. Since the incident, Diane had become an unofficial advisor to Jason's team, leveraging her extensive experience with discrimination cases to help navigate the investigation. Her network of contacts in civil rights advocacy was proving invaluable. I need to step out for a meeting, Jason told Angela. Keep digging. I want to know who authorized this system and how far up the approval chain it went. An hour later, Jason sat across from Monica Taylor, a former Skyline flight attendant, in a private room at his hotel. Diane Foster sat beside him, recording the conversation with Monica's permission. I worked for Skyline for 6 years, Monica began, her hands clutching a coffee cup tightly. I loved my job until I was assigned to Captain Reynolds' crew. She described a toxic environment where minority passengers were routinely given inferior service under the guise of security protocols. Flight attendants who objected were assigned less desirable routes or given negative performance reviews. The breaking point came when an elderly Indian couple was separated during boarding because of a random security check that lasted so long they nearly missed the flight, Monica continued. When I filed a complaint, I was told to focus on my duties and leave security concerns to the professionals. 2 months later, I was terminated for performance issues that had never been mentioned in any previous evaluation. By the end of the day, Jason had spoken with 4 more former employees with similar stories. Each account added another piece to the puzzle of how discrimination had become institutionalized at Skyline. That evening, a video call connected Jason with the 12 members of Skyline's board of directors. The atmosphere was tense from the first moment. Jason, while we all deplore discrimination, there's significant concern about your handling of this situation, began Robert Harrington, the board's senior member. The suspension of an entire flight crew without the usual progressive disciplinary process has created substantial liability exposure. What would the usual process have been? Jason asked mildly. Investigation, documentation, verbal warning, written warning, then potential suspension for proven serious violations, recited Patricia Alvarez, another board member. Jason nodded thoughtfully before displaying a screen of documents. Like these investigations? He scrolled through complaint after complaint, each marked, resolved, despite no evident action. Or this documentation? He showed performance reviews that mysteriously omitted any mention of discrimination complaints. Perhaps you mean verbal warnings like this one, where Captain Reynolds was told to be more mindful of passenger perceptions after refusing to allow a black family to board during early boarding despite their young children. The board members shifted uncomfortably. The usual process, Jason continued calmly, was designed to create the appearance of accountability while ensuring nothing actually changed. That ends today. He outlined the preliminary findings of Angela's investigation, including the SVIP flagging system and the pattern of retribution against employees who reported concerns. With each revelation, the board's resistance visibly weakened. We've scheduled individual interviews with each of you, Jason concluded. I expect full cooperation in determining who knew what and when. Anyone found to have enabled or concealed discriminatory practices will be removed from the board, regardless of tenure or ownership stake. Later that night, back in his hotel suite, Jason took a rare moment of reflection. On his tablet, he pulled up a photo of his mother. Darlene Walker had passed away 2 years earlier, never seeing the full extent of her son's success but having laid every brick in its foundation. You were right, Mom, he whispered to the image. Twice as good for half as far. But you never told me what to do when I got far enough to change the rules. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Carol entered with a concerned expression. Captain Reynolds is going public in a big way, he reported. He's appeared on 3 conservative talk shows today calling you a social justice warrior billionaire, using woke politics to destroy careers. He's positioning himself as a victim of cancel culture. Jason wasn't surprised. It was a predictable strategy: reframe discrimination as a political disagreement rather than a moral and legal violation. He's also filed a wrongful termination lawsuit, Terrell continued, claiming that the suspension constitutes constructive dismissal without due process. Good, Jason replied, surprising his assistant. Discovery works both ways. His lawsuit gives us legal grounds to access his personal communications, including any he may have had with other crew members about passenger treatment. The next morning brought another development. Stephanie Miller had scheduled a press conference of her own. Unlike Reynolds' combative approach, she appeared contrite and tearful on camera. "I want to apologize to Mr. Walker and to any passenger who has ever felt unwelcome or disrespected on one of my flights," she said, her voice breaking. "While I never intended to discriminate, I now understand how my actions could be perceived that way. I'm committed to learning and growing from this experience." It was a carefully crafted statement, acknowledging perception without admitting intent, expressing remorse without accepting responsibility. Jason recognized the handiwork of a crisis management consultant. What interested him more was the shifting dynamic between Reynolds and Stephanie. Initially unified in their defense, they were now taking dramatically different approaches. Reynolds was doubling down, while Stephanie was seeking redemption. By the end of the week, Angela's team had completed their preliminary investigation. The findings exceeded even Jason's worst expectations. Discrimination at Skyline wasn't just common, it was systematically enforced through training, evaluation, and advancement practices. Those who complied were rewarded, those who objected were marginalized or removed. Most disturbing was evidence that Skyline's previous executive team had been fully aware of these practices. Internal emails revealed discussions about the business case for making certain passengers feel exclusive by ensuring others felt excluded. Jason convened an emergency all-hands meeting with Skyline's senior leadership. Walking into the company's main conference room, he felt the weight of both resistance and desperate hope from those assembled. "The investigation results are clear," he began without preamble. "This company has institutionalized discrimination while creating elaborate systems to deny its existence. The people in this room either actively participated in that system or failed to challenge it." He paused, looking at each person individually. "You're wondering if I'm here to fire all of you. I'm not." A ripple of confused relief moved through the room. Systemic problems require systemic solutions. Replacing individuals without changing the system would accomplish nothing. Instead, we're going to transform this airline from the inside out, beginning today. Those of you willing to be part of that transformation are welcome to stay. Those who aren't should leave now. No one moved. "Good," Jason nodded. "Then let's get to work." The mahogany conference table in Skyline's executive suite had witnessed countless negotiations, but none quite like this. Jason Walker sat at the head, Angela Daniels and Diane Foster flanking him on either side. Across from them, Captain Thomas Reynolds and Stephanie Miller occupied chairs that seemed to physically separate as the meeting progressed. This face-to-face confrontation had been Jason's idea. Standard corporate procedure would have handled everything through lawyers and HR, but Jason believed in looking people in the eye when making life-altering decisions. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting," Jason began, his tone measured and professional. "I wanted to discuss the incident personally before any final determinations are made." Reynolds sat ramrod straight in his captain's uniform, though he'd been suspended from flight duty for a week. His attorney had advised against this meeting, but Reynolds had insisted, confident in his ability to justify his actions. Stephanie appeared more subdued, her usual immaculate appearance slightly diminished by the strain of the past week. Unlike Reynolds, she had come without legal representation, a decision that spoke volumes about her differing strategy. "This witch hunt is completely unprecedented," Reynolds began without preamble. "In my 19 years with Skyline, I've never seen an entire crew suspended over a customer service misunderstanding. Is that how you characterize what happened on Flight 372? Jason asked. A misunderstanding? Absolutely, Reynolds replied without hesitation. Ms. Miller didn't recognize you as a first-class passenger based on your appearance. That's not discrimination, it's attention to detail. First-class passengers typically present themselves in a certain way. Jason raised an eyebrow. And how exactly should a first-class passenger present themselves? Professionally, Reynolds answered immediately. Business attire, proper grooming, a certain demeanor that indicates they're accustomed to premium environments. I see, Jason nodded thoughtfully. Stephanie, would you agree with that assessment? All eyes turned to Stephanie, who shifted uncomfortably. I wouldn't put it exactly that way. How would you put it? Angela asked. Stephanie took a deep breath. Mr. Walker, I didn't serve you immediately because you didn't fit what I was trained to expect in first class. But I can see now that my expectations were based on biases I didn't recognize I had. Reynolds shot her a look of betrayal. What are you doing, Stephanie? We followed protocol. There's nothing to apologize for. Jason leaned forward slightly. What protocol specifically instructed you to deny meal service to a confirmed first-class passenger, Captain Reynolds? Safety and service protocols require additional verification when something seems out of place, Reynolds insisted. It's about pattern recognition, which is essential in aviation safety. Pattern recognition, Jason repeated. Let me show you something about patterns. He nodded to Angela, who activated the room's display screen. A series of images appeared, frame captures from the cabin surveillance camera on Flight 372. Each showed a passenger in casual attire, jeans, t-shirts, hoodies, being served by Stephanie with a smile. All were white. These passengers were all in first class on your flight, Jason explained calmly. All dressed casually. None were asked to verify their seating assignment multiple times. None were suggested to move to economy for their comfort. None had wine spilled on their electronics. Reynolds' face flushed dark red. Cherry-picked examples taken out of context. You can't possibly. I'm not finished, Jason interrupted, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel. Angela, show the passenger manifest analysis. The screen changed to display data from the past 6 months of flights under Reynolds' command. Statistics highlighted in red showed that passengers with traditionally African American or Middle Eastern names were 8 times more likely to be subjected to additional verification procedures than those with European names. This isn't about one incident, Jason continued. This is about a pattern of behavior documented across hundreds of flights. Reynolds' composure finally cracked. You people always play the race card when you don't get your way. Aviation security isn't a social justice playground. We make split-second judgments to keep passengers safe. The room fell silent at the outburst. Stephanie visibly recoiled from her former captain. You people. Jason repeated quietly. Reynolds realized his error too late. I didn't mean, that came out wrong. I think it came out exactly as intended, Diane observed. And it's consistent with statements you've made on social media. Another series of screenshots appeared on the display, Reynolds' private Facebook posts complaining about diversity quotas in pilot hiring, jokes about passenger names he couldn't pronounce, and comments about feeling under siege in today's PC airline industry. These were private communications. Reynolds protested. Which you made using company devices on company networks, Angela pointed out. The employee handbook clearly states that such communications are subject to monitoring. Stephanie stared at the screen, then at Reynolds, horror dawning on her face. Thomas, tell me you didn't really write these things. Reynolds ignored her, focusing his anger on Jason. You set me up. You came onto that flight looking like you didn't belong specifically to provoke a reaction. So you admit that in your judgment, a black man in casual clothes doesn't belong in first class? Jason asked. That's not what I said. Reynolds snapped. It's precisely what you said, Diane interjected. And it aligns perfectly with the documented pattern of discriminatory behavior. Reynolds turned to Stephanie, seeking an ally. Back me up here. We've worked together for years. You know how I run my crew. Stephanie looked down at her hands. I can't, Thomas. Seeing everything laid out like this. I can't defend it anymore. So you're throwing me under the bus to save yourself? Reynolds demanded. I'm acknowledging reality, Stephanie replied quietly. The way we've been operating isn't right. I didn't see it clearly until now, but I can't unsee it. Jason studied her for a long moment. Stephanie, why did you come here without your attorney? She met his gaze directly for the first time. Because I wanted to speak for myself, not hide behind legal strategies. I made mistakes, serious ones, and I need to own that. Convenient timing for this epiphany, Reynolds scoffed. Perhaps, Jason acknowledged. But it's a start. He turned back to Stephanie. Do you understand why your actions on that flight were discriminatory? Yes, she replied without hesitation. I applied different standards based on appearance. I made assumptions about who belongs in premium cabins. I've been doing it for years without questioning why. And if you were to remain with Skyline, would you be willing to not only change your own behavior but actively work to change the culture that encouraged it? Hope flickered across Stephanie's face. Yes, absolutely. Reynolds slammed his hand on the table. This is ridiculous. She's telling you what you want to hear to save her job, and you're falling for it because it fits your narrative. Jason remained unruffled. Captain Reynolds, you've had every opportunity to reflect on your actions and their impact. Instead, you've doubled down, made media appearances attacking the company, and continued to demonstrate the exact mindset that created this problem. He slid a document across the table. This is formal notice of termination, effective immediately. Your belongings have been packed from your locker and will be delivered to your home. Your final compensation package includes 3 months' salary as required by your contract, though your legal actions against the company may affect those terms. Reynolds stared at the document, then at Jason, rage and disbelief battling on his face. You'll regret this. The pilots' union won't stand for it. You think you've seen backlash? You haven't seen anything yet. I've faced worse threats from more powerful people, Jason replied evenly. Clean out your desk by the end of the day. After Reynolds stormed out, Jason turned to Stephanie. Your situation is more complicated. I understand if you need to terminate me too, she said, her voice small. That would be the easy choice, Jason agreed. But easy choices rarely create lasting change. He slid another document across the table. This is a conditional offer of continued employment. The conditions are extensive. Stephanie scanned the document, her eyes widening. 6 months probation, mandatory anti-bias training, community service with civil rights organizations, reduction in rank. She looked up. An eventual reassignment to diversity and inclusion training. If you complete all requirements successfully, Jason confirmed. You made a mistake, a serious one rooted in systemic problems. I believe in accountability, but I also believe in redemption when someone genuinely wants to change. Why offer me this chance and not Captain Reynolds, she asked. Because you've shown something he hasn't, the capacity to recognize your mistakes and the willingness to do the hard work of addressing them, Jason explained. Changing a culture requires both consequences for harmful behavior and pathways to redemption for those willing to be part of the solution. Stephanie wiped away tears. I don't deserve this opportunity. Perhaps not, Jason acknowledged. But the thousands of passengers who will interact with a reformed Skyline Airways deserve a company that doesn't just punish discrimination but actively works to eliminate it. You can be part of that effort, or you can walk away. The choice is yours. After Stephanie left with her conditional offer, Diane turned to Jason with newfound respect. That was unexpected. Most executives would have fired both to minimize liability and move on. I didn't buy this airline to minimize liability, Jason replied. I bought it to transform it. Sometimes transformation requires removing toxic elements completely. Other times, it means giving people the chance to grow. Angela nodded in agreement. Reynolds was never going to change. He doesn't even see the problem. Exactly, Jason said, gathering his papers. And we can't build a new culture with people who are committed to preserving the old one. As they left the conference room, Jason thought about the confrontation's significance beyond these individual cases. The real challenge wasn't punishing past discrimination but preventing future incidents. That would require much more than firing a few employees, it would demand reimagining the entire company from the ground up. The groundwork for that transformation was already being laid, and the confrontation today had been just one crucial step in a much longer journey. 3 months after the Flight 372 incident, Jason Walker stood in Skyline Airways' largest training facility addressing 200 newly hired employees. The company's traditional navy blue uniforms had been redesigned, incorporating subtle elements from diverse cultural traditions while maintaining professional appearance standards. Welcome to the new Skyline, Jason began, looking out at faces representing a much broader spectrum of humanity than the company had previously employed. You're joining us at a pivotal moment in our history. 3 months ago, an incident forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about our culture. Today, we're building something better together. The transformation of Skyline Airways had begun immediately after Captain Reynolds' termination and Stephanie Miller's conditional reinstatement. Jason had assembled a task force comprising existing employees, industry experts, and civil rights advocates to reimagine every aspect of the airline's operations through a lens of genuine inclusion. The changes were comprehensive. Every employee, from baggage handlers to executives, underwent mandatory anti-bias training developed in partnership with leading civil rights organizations. Unlike the perfunctory, diversity seminars, common in corporate America, these sessions addressed real scenarios, encouraged honest conversation about unconscious prejudices, and provided practical tools for interrupting discriminatory behaviors. Hiring practices were revamped to eliminate bias. Job descriptions were rewritten to focus on essential skills rather than subjective, culture fit assessments. Interview panels were diversified. Recruitment expanded beyond traditional aviation pipelines to tap underrepresented talent pools. Most significantly, the customer service model was completely redesigned. The problematic special verification of identity protocol was eliminated, replaced with standardized service procedures applied equally to all passengers regardless of appearance. Anonymous reporting systems allowed both employees and passengers to flag concerns without fear of retaliation. Not everyone embraced these changes. 17 employees, including 4 pilots who had been close to Reynolds, resigned in protest. Industry traditionalists criticized Jason for putting social justice ahead of shareholder value. Conservative media outlets ran segments questioning whether lowered standards would compromise safety. The most organized resistance came from a faction within the pilots' union. Led by Reynolds' former colleagues, they filed grievances alleging that his termination violated collective bargaining agreements. They organized a work-to-rule action, following every regulation to the letter in ways that created deliberate inefficiencies and delays. Jason handled the resistance strategically rather than punitively. He met directly with union leaders, acknowledging their legitimate concerns about process while standing firm on the non-negotiable commitment to eliminating discrimination. He authorized premium pay for pilots who volunteered for additional training sessions, creating financial incentives that gradually eroded support for the work slowdown. By the 3rd month, operational metrics were showing remarkable improvement. Customer complaints had decreased by 38%. Employee retention in traditionally high-turnover positions had increased. Most tellingly, passenger satisfaction scores from minority travelers had risen dramatically. But statistics told only part of the story. The real transformation was happening in daily interactions and shifting mindsets. Our most important metric isn't financial, Jason told the new employees. It's whether every passenger and every employee feels valued, respected, and safe. That's the standard we hold ourselves to now. After the orientation session, Jason met with Angela Daniels in her new office. As Skyline's newly appointed Chief Culture Officer, a position created specifically for her, Angela had been the architect of many of the company's reforms. The anonymous reporting system flagged something interesting yesterday, she told Jason, pulling up a dashboard on her screen. A first-class flight attendant reported herself for unconsciously giving preferential treatment to white male passengers. Self-reporting? Jason raised an eyebrow. That's new. It's Stephanie Miller, Angela revealed. She's become almost zealous about identifying and correcting bias, both in herself and others. Stephanie's journey had been one of the most surprising developments of the past 3 months. After accepting the conditional employment offer, she had thrown herself into the required anti-bias training with unexpected enthusiasm. She had completed over 80 hours of volunteer work with civil rights organizations, far exceeding the minimum requirement. Most significantly, she had become a powerful voice for change within the company, sharing her story as a cautionary tale during training sessions. How are the veterans responding to her? Jason asked. Mixed, Angela admitted. Some see her as a turncoat. Others appreciate her honesty. But the new hires really connect with her story. Seeing someone acknowledge mistakes and work to change resonates more than perfect people preaching perfection. Later that afternoon, Jason visited the Customer Experience Center where Diane Foster was consulting with Skyline's service design team. After the incident, he had hired her firm to help develop new service protocols that maintained excellence while eliminating bias. We're finalizing the premium cabin standards, Diane explained, showing him draft materials. The key innovation is moving from subjective assessments to objective service sequences. Every passenger receives the same sequence of interactions regardless of appearance, language, or other factors that previously triggered differential treatment. And the training to implement this? Jason asked. That's where Stephanie comes in, Diane replied. She's been remarkably effective at explaining how subtle biases affected her previous service decisions. Coming from someone who lived it rather than consultants like us, the message lands differently. As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, Jason took a moment to reflect on how far they had come, and how far they still had to go. The transformation wasn't just about policies and procedures, it was about creating lasting cultural change in an industry with deeply entrenched traditions. His phone buzzed with a news alert. CNN was running a segment on the Skyline Revolution, featuring interviews with industry analysts discussing how other airlines were beginning to examine their own practices in response to Skyline's reforms. The segment included a brief clip of Reynolds appearing on a conservative talk show, still bitter and unrepentant, contrasted with recent footage of Stephanie speaking candidly about her journey at an industry conference. That evening, Jason joined a virtual town hall with employees across Skyline's network. Unlike the stilted corporate communications of the previous management, these sessions were unscripted and often raw, with employees encouraged to ask difficult questions and share honest concerns. Some passengers are complaining that service feels mechanical now that we're following standardized protocols, one flight attendant noted. They miss the personalized touches. That's a valid concern, Jason acknowledged. The challenge is distinguishing between personalization based on expressed preferences versus assumptions based on appearance. We need to get creative about how we personalize without discriminating. Another employee raised a different issue. I'm worried we've gone too far in the other direction. I hesitated to ask a passenger whose carry-on seemed oversized to check it because he was black, and I was afraid of appearing biased. That's the overcorrection phase, Angela explained. It's normal during major culture change. The key is applying standards consistently regardless of race, not ignoring standards for fear of appearing biased. As the town hall continued, Jason was struck by the employees' engagement. People were wrestling honestly with complex issues instead of simply following orders or saying what they thought management wanted to hear. That intellectual and emotional investment was perhaps the most significant sign that real transformation was taking root. The journey was far from complete. True culture change would require years, not months. Some reforms would prove imperfect and need adjustment. Resistance would continue, taking new forms as old patterns were disrupted. But watching the passionate discussion unfold among employees who 3 months ago would have remained silent, Jason felt cautiously optimistic. The transformation that had begun with a moment of discrimination was evolving into something more profound, a genuine commitment to creating an airline where dignity and respect weren't just slogans but lived values. As the town hall concluded, Jason shared a final thought: change this fundamental is never easy or comfortable. But I believe the company we're building together will not only be more just, it will also be more successful. Because when every employee and every passenger feels truly valued, everything else improves along with it. 6 months to the day after Flight 372, Jason Walker found himself once again in first class on a Skyline Airways flight from Chicago to San Francisco. This time, however, he wasn't traveling incognito. As he settled into his seat in a casual sweater and jeans, the flight attendant, a young South Asian man named Raj, greeted him by name with a warm smile. "Good morning, Mr. Walker. Welcome aboard. Can I offer you a pre-departure beverage?" Jason accepted a sparkling water, noting the consistency with which Raj was greeting each first-class passenger, the same courteous tone, the same attentive service regardless of appearance, age, or race. It was a small thing, perhaps, but representative of the broader transformation that had taken root at Skyline over the past 6 months. The airline industry publication Air Travel Monthly had recently featured Skyline Airways on its cover with the headline, "The Inclusion Revolution." How one incident transformed an airline and challenged an industry. The article detailed the comprehensive changes Jason had implemented and their measurable impact on both passenger satisfaction and employee engagement. More significantly, the story had sparked a broader conversation within the industry. 3 other major carriers had since announced their own anti-bias initiatives, tacitly acknowledging that Skyline's experience had exposed problems that existed across aviation. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Jason opened his laptop to review the latest company metrics. Skyline's stock, after an initial plunge following the incident, had rebounded to reach a 5-year high. Customer satisfaction scores showed consistent improvement across all passenger demographics. Employee retention had increased by 23%. But the numbers that gave Jason the most satisfaction were less quantifiable: the steady stream of messages from minority passengers sharing positive experiences, the unsolicited feedback from employees about feeling more valued and empowered, the industry recognition for creating a more inclusive aviation model. A familiar face appeared beside his seat, Stephanie Miller, now serving as Skyline's Director of Inclusive Service Training. She had completed her probationary period with exemplary performance and had been promoted to help implement the new service standards across the airline's network. "Mr. Walker," she greeted him professionally. "Mind if I join you for a moment?" Jason gestured to the empty seat beside him. "Please." Stephanie had undergone a remarkable transformation of her own. Beyond the required training and community service, she had voluntarily enrolled in courses on racial justice and unconscious bias. She had become a powerful advocate for change, sharing her story candidly as both a cautionary tale and a testament to the possibility of growth. "I just finished conducting training sessions with our newest flight attendant class," she reported. 92% passed the situational judgment assessments on the first attempt, our highest success rate yet. "That's excellent progress," Jason nodded. "How are they responding to the case study?" The case study was Stephanie's own story. The incident on Flight 372 was now used as a teaching tool for all new hires, with Stephanie herself often leading the discussion. "It resonates," she said quietly. "Especially when I explain that I didn't think of myself as prejudiced. I thought I was just following protocols and making judgment calls based on experience. Helping them see how bias operates beneath conscious awareness seems to be the key breakthrough moment. Their conversation was interrupted by a notification on Jason's phone, a news alert about Captain Reynolds. After his termination from Skyline, Reynolds had briefly become a cause célèbre in conservative media circles, giving interviews about cancel culture and reverse discrimination. He had eventually secured a position with a smaller regional carrier, only to be fired again after passenger complaints about discriminatory treatment. "Did you see this?" Jason showed Stephanie the alert. She sighed. "I'm not surprised." Thomas was never willing to consider that he might be wrong. Even when confronted with clear evidence. Some people can change when shown the impact of their actions, Jason observed. Others can't, or won't. Stephanie nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking a lot about what made the difference for me. Why I could change when Thomas couldn't." "What conclusion did you reach?" "I think it comes down to what you value most," she replied. Thomas valued being right, having his authority and judgment validated. "I discovered that I valued being better, growing beyond my mistakes even if it meant acknowledging painful truths." As Stephanie returned to her duties, Jason reflected on her insight. The most significant transformation at Skyline hadn't been the policies or procedures, it had been creating a culture where growth was valued above perfection, where acknowledging mistakes was seen as strength rather than weakness. Angela Daniels, now a permanent member of Skyline's executive team as Chief Culture Officer, had made this principle the cornerstone of her approach. "We don't expect perfect people," she often told new employees. "We expect people committed to becoming better today than they were yesterday." The flight landed in San Francisco right on schedule. As passengers disembarked, Jason noticed a young black man in his early 20s looking slightly uncomfortable in first class, checking his boarding pass repeatedly as if reassuring himself he was in the right place. Jason recognized the behavior immediately, the hyper-awareness of someone who expects to be challenged, who has been made to feel they don't belong in certain spaces. He had experienced it himself countless times throughout his life, even after achieving extraordinary success. "First time in first class?" Jason asked as they both stood to retrieve their carry-ons. The young man looked startled, then relieved at Jason's friendly tone. "That obvious, huh?" "Only because I've been there," Jason smiled. "I'm Jason Walker." Recognition dawned on the young man's face. "The Jason Walker? From the discrimination incident?" "Man, we studied your case in my business ethics class last semester." "Is that right?" Jason chuckled. "And what's your name?" "DeAndre Johnson. I just graduated from Howard's business program. Starting my first corporate job next week." As they walked together toward the terminal, DeAndre explained that he'd used his signing bonus to upgrade his flight as a personal celebration of his achievement. "I almost didn't do it," he admitted. "Kept thinking maybe I should save the money or that I wouldn't fit in up here." "And how was the experience?" Jason asked. "Honestly? Amazing. The crew treated me like I belonged from the moment I stepped on board." DeAndre hesitated, then added, "My dad told me it wouldn't always be that way. He's had different experiences." "Things are changing," Jason said. "Too slowly, perhaps, but they're changing." At the baggage claim, Jason impulsively handed DeAndre his business card. "If you're interested in working for a company that's serious about creating an inclusive environment, send me your resume. We're always looking for talented people who understand the value of dignity and respect." DeAndre stared at the card in amazement. "Seriously? Just like that?" "Just like that," Jason confirmed. "Though I should warn you, our standards are high. We expect excellence, commitment, and the courage to speak up when something isn't right." "I can handle that," DeAndre replied with growing confidence. As they parted ways, Jason felt the full circle moment. 6 months ago, he had been the black man questioned and humiliated in first class. Today, he had the power to ensure that the DeAndre Johnsons of the world would have different experiences, not just on airplanes, but in boardrooms, executive suites, and every other space where people of color had historically been made to feel they didn't belong. The transformation of Skyline Airways had begun with a moment of discrimination, but its legacy would be something far more powerful, a template for how organizations could acknowledge uncomfortable truths, take meaningful action, and create lasting change. That evening, at a transportation industry gala where Skyline was being recognized for its diversity initiatives, Jason concluded his acceptance speech with a reflection on the journey. 6 months ago, I was denied a meal in first class. What happened next wasn't about revenge or punishment, it was about responsibility. The responsibility we all have to use whatever power we possess to create spaces where every person is treated with dignity. Sometimes that means difficult conversations. Sometimes it means painful change. But always, it means recognizing that our actions, or our silence, shape the world others must navigate. At Skyline Airways, we've chosen to act, to speak, and to transform not just our airline but perhaps, in some small way, our society. That work continues, every day, with every flight, with every interaction. And while we're proud of how far we've come, we know the journey toward true equality has only just begun. Jason Walker's journey teaches us that true change requires more than just identifying discrimination, it demands systematic transformation. While many would have settled for an apology or monetary compensation, Jason recognized that isolated incidents are symptoms of deeper cultural problems. His approach demonstrates that accountability must be balanced with opportunity for growth, as seen in his different handling of Reynolds and Stephanie. The story reminds us that power carries responsibility, not just to punish wrongdoing but to create environments where dignity is universal. It shows that meaningful change often meets resistance but can ultimately transform industries when leaders are committed to justice over convenience. Perhaps most importantly, it illustrates how discrimination persists even for those who have made it, revealing that no amount of personal success can fully shield individuals from bias. The cycle of mentorship between Jason and DeAndre reminds us that those who break barriers have a special obligation to hold the door open for others following behind. Have you ever witnessed discrimination that made you wish you had the power to change things? Comment below with "Justice" if you believe companies should be held accountable for discriminatory practices. If this story of standing up against racism inspired you, smash that like button to help others find it. Subscribe for more powerful stories about overcoming injustice and breaking barriers. Share this video with someone who needs courage to speak up when they witness discrimination. Thank you for watching, and remember, your voice matters in the fight against racism. Sometimes one person's stand can transform entire systems.